what thinking is and why do we think? These questions arise from the assumption that the thoughts are self-generated and spontaneous. But actually, the brain is only a reactor, not a creator. It is very difficult to accept this because we have for centuries been made to believe or brainwashed. That is very difficult to accept my statement that there are no thoughts at all. Centuries we have been made to believe that there is an entity, there is an I, that there is a self, that there is a psyche, that there is a mind, and so on. If you accept the fact, it may not be a fact to you, you may not accept it, you will most probably reject it, and most people will not hesitate to reject that there is no such thing as a soul, and soul is created by the thinking of man. We have been fed on this kind of a bunk for centuries. The diaper to be changed, we will all die of starvation. If you do not want a thing, is there a thinking? Wanting and thinking go together. And thought is matter, you see. So you use thought to achieve either material or spiritual goals. But unfortunately, we place spiritual goals in a higher level and consider ourselves to be very superior to those who use the thought to achieve material goals. So actually, whether you call it spiritual or material, even the so-called spiritual values are materialistic in their values. So it is matter. Thought is matter. And as I said at the very beginning, thought is not a creator of thought, it is responding to the stimuli. What is there is only the stimulus and response. Even the fact that there is a response to the stimulus is something which cannot be experienced by us except through the help of thought, which creates a division between the stimulus and response. Actually, the stimulus and response is a unitary movement. You can't even say that there is a sensation, and you have no way of experiencing even the so-called sensations we think we experience them all the time cannot be experienced by us except through the knowledge we have of the sensations. What is there is only the knowledge we have of the self, the knowledge that we have gathered from or passed on to us from generation to generation. And through the help of this knowledge, we create what we call self, and then experience self as separate from the functioning of this body. So is there such a thing as a self? Is there such a thing as I? For me, the only I is the first person singular pronoun. I use I to make the conversation simpler and call you you and I. But there is simply what we call I is only a first person singular pronoun. Other than that, is there any such thing as I? Is there any such thing as self? Is there any such entity different from the functioning of this living organism? See, somewhere along the line of evolution, I can't even make a definitive statement and say that there is such a thing as evolution, but we assume and presume that there is such a thing as evolution. And somewhere along the line, the human species experienced this self-consciousness which doesn't exist in the other species we have on this planet. The very experience of what we call, what separates us from the totality of things. The problem is, and that is what I want to emphasize, the whole nature is a single unit. You see, man cannot separate himself from the totality of what we call nature. Unfortunately, through the help of this self-consciousness which occurred somewhere along the line, he accorded to himself a superior place and placed himself on a higher level and treated himself, and we still continue to treat, as superior to the other species of life that we have on this planet. Mm-hmm. That is the reason why we have created this disharmony. That is why we have created these tremendous problems, ecological problems and other problems. Actually, man, or whatever you want to call him, cannot be separated from the totality of nature. That is where we have created one of the greatest blunders, and that unfortunately is the tragedy of man.
What we think of as I is much more a symbol than it is a reality. The living organism, the whole mind-body, is much more than anything we mean by I. I largely stands for your personality, your role in life. And the very word person, as you probably know, comes from the Latin persona, a word originally used for the mask worn by actors in Greco-Roman drama. That through which sound comes because the mask had a megaphonic mouth to carry the voice in open-air theaters. So when you speak of being a real person, it really means being a genuine fake. Because the personality is only the front. What is behind it? Well, of course, the organism is behind it. The whole organism. And we must be very careful not to confuse the organism with various symbols that we have for it, because those symbols can be extremely misleading. If we say the organism is the body, what we usually mean by the body is an impoverished meaning. When we speak of my body, that is to say my vehicle, my physical automobile, that is an unenriched meaning of the word body. Because what you really are as a body, as a living organism, is not some sort of separate existence coated by a skin which divides you from the rest of the world. Shakespeare has King John saying to Hubert, "Within this wall of flesh there is a soul, counts thee her creditor." Within this wall of flesh, the skin considered as a barrier, when actually, from a biological point of view, the human skin and all skins are osmotic membranes. You know, when you get something by osmosis, by sort of soaking it in, so in the same way, one's skin is a spongy construction, full of holes, full of communicators, nerve ends. And your skin is simply a vibrating membrane through which the so-called external world flows into you and through you. So that you yourself actually are not so much an entity that moves around in an environment. You are much more like a whirlpool in a stream. And as you know, the whirlpool is constant only in its doing, that is to say, in its whirling. And you can recognize individual whirligigs in a stream. But the water is flowing through them all the time. They are never the same for a second. And so it is also with us. Or imagine it in another way. Supposing you have a rope, and 1 foot of the rope is made of hemp. 1 foot of it is made of cotton. 1 foot of it is made of silk. 1 foot of it is made of nylon, and so on. Now tie a simple knot in the rope. Now move the knot along the rope. And 1 minute it will be hemp, the next cotton, next silk, next nylon, and so on. Same knot. It will be recognizable as a continuing knot, as that knot, the knot in that rope. But the constitution of it will change as it moves. And so our constitution is changing constantly. Imagine, for example, a university. The student body, undergraduate, changes every 4 years. The faculty changes every so often. The buildings keep changing more and more. What constitutes the University of California? It certainly isn't the faculty, it isn't the students, it isn't the governors, it isn't the administration, it isn't the buildings. What is it? Why, a doing, a behavior, a universitying process of study and experiment and so on. So it is exactly the same with you. You flow. You are a process. But how do we draw the line about this process and its relationship to all other processes? We find that a very difficult thing to do the more you think about it. If you really felt with your whole organism, instead of just with that part of it called conscious attention, you would become aware of this flowing fact. And you would get a very strange feeling, which at first might frighten you. It is possible, of course, to have this feeling. And the feeling is like this. You would not be quite sure how to interpret it. You might feel that you yourself were doing everything else that's happening. That would be one way of feeling. The other way of feeling it would be that you are doing nothing at all, but that everything else is doing you. And you would feel completely passive, like a puppet on the end of strings. Although, on the other hand, if you got the feeling that you were doing it all, you would feel like God Almighty. It is very easy for our consciousness to slip into this state of sensation. It can happen spontaneously, like measles. It can happen by training, as when someone practices yoga. It can happen chemically, as when certain drugs are taken. And one has to be very careful about this feeling because it's enormously easy to misinterpret it. Either as being omnipotent, being God in the personal, literal sense, or as being helpless and merely driven. Now, what should be understood is that both these ways of feeling are right, only they must both be taken together. To be simultaneously omnipotent and helpless. These are two poles, opposite poles of one and the same state. Because the message that is coming through, and that we find difficulty in understanding because it's contrary to our common sense, contrary to our whole history and conditioning, the message that's coming through is you as a living organism and all that is going on in your environment constitute a single process.